The Ibon study notes that producing GM corn has an adverse impact on the environment on people's health. For instance, farmers said that although they would have a good harvest initially, the crop needs increasing volumes of fertilizers and agrochemicals because of increased pestilence. Also, the herbicide-tolerant BT corn requires increasing use of glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup. The herbicide made by Monsanto, the agrochemical corporation that introduced BT corn and later Roundup-ready GM corn in the country. With regard to health, the study finds that farmers have experienced stomach pains, diarrhea, chest pains, itching, and skin allergies after prolonged exposure to BT corn. Farmers and their families have also experienced numbness of lips and tongue after eating young GM corn. No monitoring. Despite being standard protocol, the research has found that the Bureau of Plant Industry, the country's GM crops monitoring agency, has not conducted any post-monitoring on the impact of GM corn. Ibon calls on the government to follow all protocols before any additional GM crops are released in the Philippines, including conducting a thorough assessment of the effects of GM corn. Ibon also asks that they look into the real impact on farmers, including their livelihood, incomes, and overall welfare. The field research includes GM corn areas in Pangasinan, Isabela, Capiz, Iloilo, Bukidnon, South Cotabato, and Sultan Kudarat.
Then, may I proceed with the department under me. Good day, everyone. I will be talking about misplaced fiscal austerity, which is practicing fiscal austerity just to get favorable credit ratings can be counterproductive. The Aquino administration in 2011 pursued fiscal austerity and spent 22.1% less in the first 11 months than it did in the same period last year. This, along with increased revenues, brought down the fiscal deficit and subsequently international credit rating agencies, Standard & Poor's, Moody's and Fitch, upgraded the country's credit ratings and outlooks. In 2011, the government cut spending on economic services, including infrastructure. In the same vein, did not fill for shortfalls in education, health and housing sectors. As a result, over the first 3 quarters of 2011, income from public construction contracted by about 46%, whereas government consumption reduced by a mere 1.7% in comparison to the same period last year. Misplaced austerity measures and an exaggerated concern about credit ratings contracts the economy, reduces demand, and undermines future growth. The proposed public-private partnerships, or PPS, are a poor substitute to real investment and public expenditure because the former are majorly driven by shorter profit, while the latter play a vital role to create development. These are just some of the economic challenges looming large over the Philippines. The country is facing significant decline in industrial production, gross domestic product, income and employment, and sales. The Aquino presidency supposedly is getting the support of the people, as indicated by its high approval ratings for the necessary economic measures that are in the general public interest. In 2011, the Aquino administration's policy choices to give greater weight to narrow foreign and domestic elite interests, unfortunately, underscores the challenge of pushing for real reform in 2012.
We also want to discuss the possible threat to our national defense, which is the Philippines. Muslim rebels drafting initial accord, but guerrillas won't disarm immediately. By Associated Press, updated Tuesday, September 18, 7:02 p.m. Manila, Philippines. Philippine government and Muslim guerrilla negotiators are drafting a preliminary agreement to settle a decades-long rebellion in the country's south, but the insurgents said Tuesday their insurrection won't end until a final pact is concluded. The initial framework agreement with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front will be made public before it's signed in a few months. Government negotiator Marvic Leonen said it will be the most significant progress in years of negotiations to settle a rebellion that has caused more than 120,000 deaths, held back development in the south, and sparked worries that rebel strongholds could become breeding grounds of Al-Qaeda-affiliated extremists. The 11-strong rebel group has been fighting for self-rule for minority Muslims in the predominantly Roman Catholic nation south. It dropped a demand for a separate Muslim state but still seeks the expansion of an existing Muslim autonomous region and more powers and resources to rehabilitate the violent and poverty-racked area. The National Accord will contain general agreements on key issues, including the extent of power, revenues, and territory to be granted to a Muslim-administered region. Rebel negotiator Muhammad said a transition commission would be established after the signing of work out the details of the initial pact, which hopefully would lead to a final accord as soon as 3 years later. He told the Associated Press, "There is now hope for peace and recovery," Leonen told a news conference, adding the expected preliminary accord would end a long era of antagonism but might not rapidly end violence in a region that has suffered much from war and remains saddled with large numbers of illegal firearms and warring armed groups. Presidential advisor Teresita Deles said the negotiators consulted legal experts and effective communities to draw wide backing for the accord. In 2008, the planning signing of the preliminary pact was scuttled when opponents went to the Supreme Court, which declared the agreement unconstitutional, prompting the rebel commanders to attack Christian communities in the south. The attacks and ensuing military offensive killed more than 100 people and displaced about 750,000 villagers before a ceasefire was forged. Last month, a rebel faction opposed to the talks attacked several army camps and outposts in the southern Maguindanao and north of the Cotabato province, sparking 2 weeks of the sporadic fighting that left more than 50 dead and displaced 45,000 others. The new unrest is after the military launched a crackdown. Iqbal said about 3,000 armed fighters from his group surrounded about 200 gunmen from the breakaway group last month and demanded they sign a pledge to stop further attacks. There has been no sign that the breakaway Bangso Moro Islamic Freedom Movement has grown significantly since it broke off from the Moro Islamic Liberation from last year. Instead of stalling the peace talks, the recent attacks by the rebel faction have only prodded the government and the larger Moro group to close ranks to safeguard the negotiations, said Bryony Lau of the Brussels-based International Crisis Group. Iqbal said his group would not lay down its firearms until a final accord is concluded, adding that both sides still need to negotiate whether the rebels should be integrated into the military or police or turned into a force that would secure a Muslim-administered region. Insurgents, he said, could form a political party and run in a democratic elections to get a chance at leading the autonomous region they have waged
I will sample in my report 3 major areas which concerns our department. First, the coastal infrastructure development. Coastal zone development has been particularly damaging to the Philippines' marine environment, especially to coral reefs, mangroves, and seagrasses. As populations have increased, so have their needs for construction materials and living space. Excavation, dredging, and coastal conversion to accommodate coastal development have seen corals being extracted for reclamation and construction, especially in coastal villages. Mangroves have particularly suffered from coastal development, notably at the hands of the aquaculture industry. In the Philippines, aquaculture has reduced mangrove stands to only 36% of 1,900 levels. Second, deforestation. After decades of deforestation, which has left about 3% of the regional cover, forests continue to be under threat from agriculture and urbanization, illegal logging, and forest fires. Sustained forest loss in the Philippines is causing severe oil erosion and is threatening the country's rich biodiversity. This is particularly worrying as many of the Philippine species which depend on these forests are endemic. They cannot be found anywhere else in the world. For example, of 180 native terrestrial mammal species here, about 61% are endemic. Inconsistent laws, inadequate regulations, weak enforcement, and lack of funding are making forest conservation a major challenge. And third, pollution. Only about 10% of sewage in the Philippines is treated or disposed of an environmentally sound manner. The rest goes back